Hey kids, this is your next video podcast featuring the Spanish-American War with your favorite United States of America versus España. So we got a war between Spain and the US, but here's the problem. Where did it take place? Oh, I don't know. It wasn't Spain or America. It was in Cuba. I like to say Cuba. Yeah, so that's the tricky part. So please try to focus on that and figure that out. Not Spain or the US. See, here is Spain over here in Europe land. Not to be confused with America. And here we got Cuba. So Cuba is one of our closest neighbors besides Canada and Mexico, which both are connected to us, of course. So since it's very close to us, it was a big concern to us what happened with it over the centuries. So the reason we are caring about Cuba at all is because they sell sugar to us. We invested somewhere around $50 million into Cuba's infrastructure, like their mines, railroads, sugar plantations. We wanted to make it as easy as possible for them to get their sugar to us. So if we go way back, way before the years covered in this class, you would learn how Spain owned Cuba for centuries and was making lots of money from it. In fact, at one point, by the mid-1800s, they say a third of the world's sugar was coming from Cuba, which was under Spanish control. After all, remember, Christopher Columbus, remember that cool cat, Chris Columbus, sailed the ocean blue, 1492? Yeah, who paid for him? He was from Italy, but who paid for him to come? Remember, it was Spain, so hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. Many of the Cubans had been slaves to the Spanish in the past, up until 1886, which if you check your math from last year in 8th grade, you remember the Civil War in America ended in 1865. So you see slavery still happened in Cuba for a few more years. But now that the Cubans aren't slaves anymore, they still aren't too much better off. Still pretty miserable. They kept trying to fight for their freedom because they had very few freedoms and they weren't able to have their own government, so they kept trying to resist against the Spanish. Now here's the big like George Washington type of figure in Cuban history, Jose Marti, a Cuban guerrilla fighter who was fighting for his people against the Spanish authorities had taken them over. They had a big rebellion, I think it was 1868, and they actually held some power for about 10 years until 1878. The rebellion collapsed and they, I guess, gave up. And Jose Marti and other Cuban rebels, his buddies, fled to the United States. I think he settled in New York City for a while. And they're waiting, they're planning, they're plotting an eventual Cuban revolution. Oh, and by the way, the word guerrilla in Spanish, guerra translates to war, and the suffix ia, if you're in Spanish class, you might know that means little, I believe. So it translates to like little war or little soldier. So they're the ones who use non-traditional fighting tactics, like maybe you've heard of it in the Vietnam War, the guerrilla fighters that were pretty tough to deal with. Attack at night, catch you off guard, that kind of thing. But anyways, Jose Marti, probably top 3 coolest names of the year so far, was a writer, poet, raised awareness of his people's problems, and helped raise money, weapons, train troops. For when the time came to fight again in Cuba. So, build up to war. After Cuba's uprising, 1895, there's another uprising, by the way. President Grover Cleveland declared the U.S. to be neutral. Hey, sad fact, that buddy Jose Marti, he actually died fighting in this next revolution, 1895. So he passed away, I guess died a martyr for his country. But yeah, he says we're staying out of it. But these guys, McKinley wants to stay out of it, but these guys are not staying out of it. They're not staying neutral. William Randolph Hearst, Joseph Pulitzer. I'm hoping that you think those names are a little bit familiar because the Hearst Corporation, they own like such a huge percentage of a lot of the broadcast like news companies today. I think WTAE in Pittsburgh is still owned by them. Joseph Pulitzer, maybe you've heard of him, like the Pulitzer Prize that goes to journalists and writers. There's different Pulitzer Prizes. So these guys are a big deal. They're very famous and they're associated with yellow journalism. Yellow journalism. The U.S. newspapers, under these guys, printed every day. These really exaggerated stories about the rebellion happening, and some of it, I don't know, I don't want to say just made up maybe, but pretty much, hey, we talk about fake news today. It's almost fake news. Bold headlines, exclamation point, exclamation point. Very, very exaggerated stories to try to sell more newspapers. That's what it's all about. It's about money. And these guys also kind of wanted there to be war because they knew that would make them sell newspapers. And I think some of them also just believe really that we should be getting involved in Cuba in the first place. But more on that later. The word yellow journalism, it has to do with this old cartoon. I don't think it's this one, but this old cartoon character and it involved um, he was yellow, and it's not something for us to talk about here, I guess. But there was a reason for that random word yellow journalism. So this guy gives Hearst and Pulitzer kind of some of the ammunition they're looking for, so to speak. General Valeriano Weyler from Spain, aka the Butcher. That's probably not a good sign if your nickname is the Butcher. By the way, that is not the actual picture of the butcher. That is just a butcher. I thought it was funny. So this guy, the Spanish bring him in to maintain order. There's been these uprisings from the Cubans. He reconcentrates them into reconcentration camps. Now look, we're not talking about the concentration camps you may have heard about with the Holocaust in Germany, World War II. But yeah, the word is the same. I mean, reconcentration camps, to concentrate them into one area so the Spanish can keep an eye on them. They don't want these rebels leading to more rebellions. And they say hundreds of thousands of Cubans were rounded up this way. Tens of thousands of them end up dying in these camps. Um, I don't know. I don't think the pure reason was to torture and kill them, but when you put thousands and thousands of people in small quarters like that in a tropical environment without proper food and sanitation, yeah, that's what's going to happen. So, anyways, these newspaper guys get a hold of this stuff and they're like, ooh, this is going to catch people's attention. Men, women, children, all dying at the hands of the Spanish. So they forced McKinley, the people forced McKinley, President McKinley, to try to negotiate with Spain. 1897. And Spain's like, okay, we don't want to make America mad, so we'll get rid of the butcher. We'll get rid of the butcher, General Weyler. We'll send him back over to Spain, and then we'll give the Cubans their own government. How about that? And we'll let them be part. They'll still be part of the Spanish Empire, but we'll give them some more control. How about that? Is that okay? Ooh, what do you think? What's it gonna be, Jose? Uh, well, what are they gonna, yeah, deal or no? No deal. Viva la Cuba! Long live Cuba. So the U.S. sends the USS Maine, our biggest, baddest ship in the U.S. Navy at the time, just in case things get messy. I repeat, just in case things get messy. So, I don't know, maybe on a totally different note, this isn't related at all, I'm sure, is there are two sparks that lead the war to the war with Spain. Maybe you can guess what the second one's going to be. But meanwhile, the first one, Spanish ambassador's letter, is written that criticizes our president, President McKinley. He calls McKinley weak and a bitter for the admiration of the crowd, meaning he's just saying whatever needs to be said in front of the people, but behind closed doors, that he's saying different stuff. And so it's an insult. And we're very offended. How dare they speak of our president like this? And the second thing, oh wow, look at that massive, beautiful ship that they brought in just in case. Well, it suddenly explodes in Havana Harbor, Havana being the capital of Cuba. Who done it? Can't believe this. It's terrible. So we got this beautiful drawing here of the ship blowing up, bodies flying in the air. They did have photography at this point, but this is a artist's rendering of the explosion happening. And if you look real close, if you take a second, look at the bottom of the screen, you can see how, ah! Jeez, how did that get, I'm so sorry, kids. Oh my gosh, I gotta get away from that. My wife must have put that there by accident. I'm so sorry. Anyways, back to the war. So the Maine blows up mysteriously. Here's some of the wreckage as they pull it from the harbor in Havana. Big questions. Who done it? Well, the American journalists, the yellow journalists, that is, Hearst and Pulitzer, they of course blame Spain. They jump to conclusions. They're thinking, oh man, this is great for selling newspapers. And it's really kind of despicable, to be honest, some of the tactics they use, the way they played this out. They get the American public all fired up, as you can imagine, and we would demand war. And remember the Maine slogan was everywhere. It was the title of songs and poems and newspaper articles. It was everywhere. Remember the Maine, remember the Maine. Kind of like after Pearl Harbor in 1941 or after 9/11 in 2001. So there's this jingoism atmosphere, which is a very fun vocab word, meaning an attitude of aggressive nationalism. It's like not just I love America, but it's like I really love America and it's way better than your country. Let's go get them. Jingoism. So April 1898, there it is. We are at war. It actually takes a few months. The Maine blew up earlier. It takes a few months, but we eventually declare war. The Spanish-American War has begun. Your days are numbered, Spain. Tú estás dead. Lo siento, tío Sam. Hey, if you look up what that translates to in English, kids, I'll gladly give you 1 extra credit point tomorrow in class if you remember. Come find me. So we have the War of 1898, the Spanish-American War. Often forgotten war. I bet not too many of you knew about this before this podcast here. So yeah, we did have photography. Look at some of the outfits, though. It's kind of like a cross between the Civil War outfits and then a little bit of World War One. The way these boots are going on and the hats. You'll see when we talk about World War One how. But we got the cannons left over, so we're transitioning. This is like definitely a transition war for America as far as the technology, the weaponry, that kind of thing. And I'm gonna pause. That's all for now. Talk about it later, tomorrow or the next day in class. But don't forget to take the podcast quiz. All right, thanks, kids.